Welcome, Krishna Subramanian. Thank you for joining. So today we're speaking with Krishna, the Chief Operating Officer of Komprise, which makes intelligent data management software. One of the biggest problems now that we're all facing, right? Managing the growth of it, the complexity of it, and then figuring out how to actually do something with it, what we have. So I want to get into all of that. But what I'm really interested in looking at your background, that you've kind of jumped between working at big companies, big titans, having really interesting jobs at places like Sun and Citrix, and also going and doing startups, a little bit the two extreme sides. So what keeps you bringing you back to the startup side?
Yeah, it's interesting. Silicon Valley overall, as you know, it's very innovation-driven culture. When our startups get acquired, that's how I've landed in bigger places typically. What made us want to start Komprise, for example, it's the third startup for me and my two co-founders. It's really the problems because we learned from customers that they were literally drowning in data. They didn't want another storage solution to the problem. They wanted something independent of all the storage and clouds that could give them a view of their data and help them move the data to the right place at the right time without getting in the way. It's the problems, when we see a problem that sounds challenging and interesting and a problem that we can solve, our background is distributed scale out computing. So we look for problems that we can address with a unique perspective. And data management is one of those problems, right? The scale of data is so massive, you cannot have a monolithic architecture to address it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think in the last maybe 10, 15 years, data has been one area, cloud computing has been an area. I think the third may be something like automation, the way we do CI/CD, DevOps, and things like that. And it's probably about 15 years. Now you have the big players in those circles, and it's these overlaps where all this new stuff, all the problems we've just created, now we're starting to think about solutions to those. So one of the, I spend a lot of time talking to people like you and companies like yours that are creating solutions that didn't exist, just a few years ago. I'd say even the problem didn't exist. And sometimes I keep using the same analogy because everybody seems to understand it really well. It's like, imagine I tried to sell you an iPhone 2 years before it was invented. Take the computer, put it on your phone. And man, that's challenging. How do you approach that? How do you come up with, usually the people you're talking to probably don't even know that was a problem to be solved yet.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think data management actually is a little bit different than that, in that people know the problem very well. They just didn't know that a solution like us existed. I think that's what we're finding. And the reason I think the problem is very well known now is because the scale and pace of data growth is just exponential, right? I mean, you just look at it, 90% of the world's data was created in the last few years. And, data is more than doubling every 2 years. And we can see it in our personal lives, right? I mean, look at your phone and look at the megapixels and the clarity of the photos you take now versus even a year or two ago. And look at how much memory you have on your phone. Every generation, you have more memory, more data, more videos, more fidelity, and that's what's happening in the world, right? That's what's happening in every field. For data management, I don't know that people don't know that there's a problem. I think the bigger thing we see is people don't know that a solution like us exists. Because data has been growing so fast, companies realize that they have to squeeze that data growth into tight budgets. But they always think the answer to that is more efficient storage. So they think, oh, if we just went to the cloud, this problem would go away. Or if we just went to our storage vendor and signed a better deal with them, this problem would go away. I think that's what we're finding, that we need to show them that every time they get locked into a silo, it's not solving the problem. they need to take a broader view. They need to make sure, I mean, all these different storage options are great, but each of them is good at a certain point in time for their data. So they really need a more holistic view of their data, and they need to be in control of their data. Giving your data to a storage or a backup vendor and letting them control it is not a good idea, because data is your corporate asset.
Yeah, it seems like it's the kind of thing that's easy to sort of almost postpone a solution. Like you say, just throw more storage at it, throw more resource or whatever at it. I mean, I do it myself at home even, I mean, I'm in the tech business, so I probably have more storage than an average person, but I keep movies and so what do? I just go get a bigger drive, or I get another one and create a bigger problem.
Yeah, we're all hoarders by nature, right? And it's not always a bad thing, especially in a business, because a lot of that data has business value. Um, but that's why you don't want to lock it away into a silo and have no visibility into it,
Yeah.
right? So, I think the idea that you can actually, I mean, our customers always say, I wish I had known about you even earlier. I mean, this is so great. We can see all our data. We can tag everything. We can save money. We can move the right thing to the right place. And then we can find it when our researchers need it. But it's educating people that data management is not storage. Data management is a separate thing from storage. It should be independent of your storage. It should be independent of your backup. And even the data management vendors should not control the data. Data should be in your control. It's your data.
Yeah, I think one thing that's hard to really appreciate, even for us in the business, is just how big data really is the scale of it, right? You mentioned like 90% every year. I've seen that, they say in the last 2 years, we've created all the data the same as before that in history. And then the next year we say it again and again and again. Just how big is big data? How does someone know if they have quote unquote, big data, so to speak?
Yeah, some of these problems, they sound so big that you almost ignore them because it just feels too overwhelming, right? But for a company, the problem is very real. I think when you hit several hundred terabytes and more, I mean, if you have a few petabytes of data, you're already feeling this pain, because every petabyte of unstructured data is a few billion files. And these are probably a few billion files strewn across hundreds to thousands of shares. Some of it is user generated data, some of it is application generated data, some of it is financial data, and some of it is ex-employee data. Usually 10 to 15% of the data in a company, it was created by ex-employees, and the business doesn't even know what's in there, but they're too afraid to touch it, right? So there's all this baggage that you're accumulating, and you don't have to think about zettabytes for this problem to become overwhelming. I mean, with a few petabytes, it's already overwhelming.
Yeah, I mean, just a few years ago, I don't think most people had heard of a petabyte. So,
Right. But
it's
now,
true.
petabytes, I mean, it's very commonplace, right? Most research institutions have petabytes of data. Most genomics companies, are in the few petabytes, and they're adding 3 to 4 times that amount every single year.
Yeah.
So it's pretty commonplace to get to petabytes these days, sadly.
Yeah, no, I mean, and that's one dimension, is the actual scale of it. That's, like I say, for those of us in the business, it's hard to imagine, for a regular person, it's almost incomprehensible. But with that, you also mentioned a petabyte's a few billion files. So that's quite some complexity as well. So even if you can have a grip on all those petabytes and have somewhere to put them, how do you deal with all that complexity? What does that look like?
That's why you need a more, programmatic way to manage data. Because imagine if there's a solution that could look at data across all your storage. It shows you what data you have. It shows you how it's growing, and you can set high-level policies. You could say, well, if nobody has touched this in a year, I want this taking the least amount of resources. If it's over 3 years, it doesn't even need to be online and live. You can give policies like that, and the system kind of manages it for you, but it indexes everything. So you can always search and find the data wherever it lives. That is data management, right? Data management is this job of analyzing, moving, and indexing and finding data no matter where it lives.
Mhm. And so there's also a concept of whether data is structured or not, which, keep it simple, basically things that are in a database are very structured. You know exactly how many of what there are and what each one looks like. They're always the same. You can usually predict which are the next ones that are going to come before they come. And now more and more, I feel like the data comes from anywhere. It could be from your camera. You mentioned your telephone. For a business, there's even, you can multiply that. How do you deal with that? The fact that you can't really know in advance what kind of data structure you have.
Exactly, and that's what we deal with, what people call unstructured data. It's not that the data has no structure, it's that it has variety of structures. So it could be PDF files, it could be genomics data, it could be oil and gas data, it could be videos, right? It could be a tweet. I mean, all these things fall under unstructured data. And 90% of the world's data now is unstructured. And so most businesses find that to be a challenge because to manage unstructured data, you have to deal with this huge volume of data very efficiently. And you have to be able to deal with large files and small files because they're not homogeneous, right? And that's what we do. I mean, that's why you want a lightweight distributed architecture to solve problems like that. Basically, we have software that just runs elastically. It shrinks and grows based on your data footprint, and you don't have to sit there and babysit it. It's lightweight. Yeah, it runs either as a service in the cloud or as virtual machines if you want more control inside your data center. But it connects to all the storage via standards. So it's not tied to just one vendor or one cloud. You can work across everything, and then it gives you analytics, and then it moves the data. When it moves the data, it moves it without any proprietary lock-in. So you can actually use the data in the cloud, because that's the other thing that's happening right now. A lot of people say, oh, cloud, I can get a really good price. It's really cheap. And then it's just like a dumping ground. They're just dumping stuff in there, and they think data is going there to die. But cloud is actually very expensive as a dumping ground because you're paying for it every single day.
Yeah.
So you really want data to go to the cloud to live, not to die. You want to be able to use that data there.
Yeah, it's funny. I use the analogy with cloud economics as sort of, actually, it's pretty much the same as hotel business. That you wouldn't go to the Radisson, rent a room, and store all your boxes there.
Yeah, right. I mean, it's so it's got to be managed very well. There are a lot of cost optimizations you can take advantage of in the cloud, but you need to know them, and you need to, again, manually doing all this or just using a vendor's, tiering inside one layer. All those things are kind of very short-lived because they don't handle really the complexity of the data, and they're not an automated way to manage things based on what you want for your data.
Yeah. So how do people solve the problem now? This is the pre-iPhone problem. You've now invented the iPhone. What have people been doing up to this point?
Yeah, they've basically been just throwing more storage at the problem, or they've been manually trying to move data around, and it is unsustainable. And that's why I think we're growing so rapidly. We've more than doubled every single year for the last 3 years, ever since we started selling this product.
Yeah.
And I think the reason for that is because this problem is a big problem in the industry.
Yeah.
And we have, very large, pharmaceutical companies, genomics companies, banks, financial services, government agencies, universities, research, all these media and entertainment, all these areas that have a lot of data and the data is growing fast, tend to be our customers because they're feeling this pain every single day.
Yeah. Well, and so let's talk about your proverbial iPhone a little bit. So we've determined data is large, it's growing extremely fast, it's complex. I think, in fact, the unstructured part of data is the part that's growing. We've also talked about how complex the infrastructure is. So, we have just complexity everywhere. So how does Komprise fit into this? It sounds like what Komprise is doing is kind of being in the middle of these various complexities. How does that work?
Yeah, so basically what Komprise does is it's software that works across these any file and object storage. That's what we focus on. And it works across them through standard protocols. So, just like you and I, we don't need an interpreter right now because we're both speaking English, right? And, file systems are like that. They speak certain languages. That's what a protocol is. And, the standard languages are NFS, SMB CIFS, and in the cloud, the object protocol, and Amazon by default, S3 has sort of become the standard for object. So Komprise talks those three protocols, NFS, SMB, and S3. So any storage you might have, it could be a NetApp array, it could be an EMC array, it could be a Windows file server, it could be a cloud filer from Amazon, EFS, or anything. And Komprise connects to all of them through these standard protocols, and it shows you all the data that you have. It shows you how much data is actually being used, how much isn't, who's using it, what kinds of data do you have, how fast is it growing, how much it's costing you, and all those things. And then you can set your policies on how you want to manage data, when you want to archive data or copy data or move data, migrate data. And then Komprise shows you how much you'll save, and then it actually does the data movement. So it's analytics, it's data movement. But the unique thing is that normally if somebody comes in and moves your data, the approach has been, okay, I'll take care of your data. Just come and ask me when you need anything and I'll give it to you, right? That's the usual tendency, but that means it's in the data path. It's an invasive solution. And what we've done very differently is we're completely non-invasive. We're outside the data path. And that's very difficult to do, but that's the problem we have solved, because that's what puts the customer in control of their data. So if you move data from a NetApp through us, you look at the data through the NetApp. You don't have to come to Komprise to see it. You will see it as if it's still on the NetApp, even if it's sitting in the cloud, and we sit behind the data path. And the data that we move to Amazon, you can go into Amazon and use it there, and you don't need to come to Komprise to get it. So we keep native access to your data everywhere, and we keep the customer in control of their data. We don't get in the way, and no storage is in the way either. Yeah. So we're eliminating that lock-in mindset that actually is kind of the core of this industry right now.
Yeah, and that's an important point, because of course, if we go way back in time, these standards were created so you wouldn't have complexity. Somebody said, NFS, this is the answer. And then a few years later, there came SMB, and then, S3 came later. And then now we have another abstraction because Microsoft Azure has a different object protocol and Google has a different one. So it sounds like what Komprise is doing is it's kind of being the interpreter of all these languages, in one place.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. I mean, it's interpreting all of them. It's moving the data around because, as all this data, a lot of people say data has gravity. It's because data is heavy. It's not easy to move it around. And you don't want to be manually moving petabytes of data around. It's a very painful job to manually do it. The product does all of that because it's a distributed architecture. It adjusts, it moves data as fast as you need it based on the network that you have and the resources you have. It throttles itself back if users are using the storage, so it's non-intrusive. So it's really an adaptive solution. It adapts to your data and to your environment and to your policies, so that all that laborious stuff that you have to manually do, it eliminates all of that. You don't have to do the grunt work anymore. You can focus on, hey, strategically, how do I want to use this data in my business? How much money do I want to save? Which options do I want to go to? How do I transform my cloud strategy? You can work on those things instead of how do I make sure the storage isn't too full? How do I make sure the IOPS are okay?
Yeah. Yeah. And, the details of this stuff to me personally is very interesting because this is my daily work. I'm sure that we could talk for a whole hour on that part, but I like the other part of the value proposition of Comprise, what you guys talk about as being the two main problems, managing this explosive data growth. But the other half of it, I think, is where it really is what's really the point, and that's unlocking the value from the data. We obviously, well, maybe we do, but most people don't manage storage for fun. The point is you want to get something out of it. I've worked in the finance sector where they have tons of valuable data they don't do anything with. And I find that ironic because in the finance sector, they talk about opportunity cost, right? And how much value you're not getting because you're not doing something. So I'd be interested in some use cases, some examples where this approach really helps a company get back to their core business and actually extract value. Because most of your customers are not in the data management business, I think. So,
I mean, a really good example actually is right now we have several pharmaceutical companies that are using our product, and some of them are building COVID vaccines, and so what they've done is using our software, they move data to the cloud, and because it helps. If you're a pharmaceutical company doing research, you're generating several terabytes of data every day. That's what your scientists are generating. So it becomes overwhelming to keep all that data in your data centers.
yeah.
So we help these companies move petabytes of data into the cloud, but because of the way we're moving it, their researchers tag the data, and Komprise carries all those tags into the cloud. And they actually, some of the, one of our customers is a global pharmaceutical company. Another research team in another country, which didn't have access to the US data centers, was able to use the data we put in the cloud using the tags, kind of we essentially are able to build a virtual data lake for them, for that tagged data for COVID, and use that for their research. So we actually saw a very practical application right now for COVID research, right?
Yeah.
Because the data was tagged and because it was available natively in the cloud, other geographies of this company were able to pick up that data set very easily instead of having to wait to gain access to a US data center and then work through laws to try to migrate the data and all of that, which would have taken so much time.
Yeah, it's amazing. I mean, that's a good use case because I know that just processing that data has so many stages, so many different stages with different requirements, different performance. And just that alone means you have to constantly be moving that data, and the fact that there is actually the cloud is amazing because I think in the old days that somebody would have had to get on an airplane and go somewhere, that this stuff can just be in Amazon and somebody in Switzerland or in California or wherever can just get that data, put it on a high-speed storage, process it, and then put it back again. So,
yeah, they don't even have to put it on high-speed storage. Right? That's what I mean by you don't want to send data to the cloud for it to die there. I mean, there's so much computing power in the cloud.
yeah.
So you want to do some quick analysis on it. Just spin up some compute instances in the cloud, do the analysis, and then you don't need the computer anymore. Push the data back down to a cheap tier. I mean, that means data is living in the cloud. It's consuming less resources when you're not using it. But when you want to use it, you can promote it up and use it in the cloud itself. You don't have to bring it back.
Yeah. No, that's the whole, I guess the whole goal is we shouldn't care again. We should actually turn the cloud into that little cloud diagram again. Yeah. I'm curious also like other types of use cases, like for instance, things like pharmaceuticals are, in the headlines, but there's also, I think, a lot of ordinary, quote unquote, ordinary businesses that don't make the headlines that are maybe not even necessarily tech focused, things like, manufacturing or automotive or, logistics, things like that. How have you seen these sort of problems be solved in those areas?
Yeah, manufacturing and engineering design in general. I mean, that's another area that has a lot of data. We have a lot of manufacturers as our customers, and places like Cadence Design Systems, Qualcomm. These are our customers, and for them, one of the problems they have is any new product they build has a very long lifetime. It might have a 15-year support lifetime, but once they've designed it, they don't need all that data immediately accessible. They just need to keep it around, but it doesn't need to consume the most expensive resources, right? So by us moving data out when it's no longer active, but still make it accessible, so they can still see it. If they want to bring that project back, or if they got a support problem on it and they had to open all those files, they can still get to it, but it's not actively being managed. We're able to save those companies millions of dollars, typically about 60 to 70% of their storage budget. We're able to save them.
Wow. Where do you see the biggest savings come from usually in these environments?
Yeah, it's interesting. You probably know this, but most companies, you cannot afford to only keep one copy of data because that would be a risky strategy. So most companies keep, many copies, typically 3, sometimes 7, 10 copies of data, because you have a data center, you have data there, then you replicate it to a mirror site in case something happens here. Then you keep 3 or 4 backups of it in case you get hit by a virus or something. And now you have 7, 8 copies of this data suddenly, right? And that all makes sense if you're actively using the data. But if you haven't touched this data in a year, do you still need these 8 copies of this data on your expensive flash storage in an expensive flash mirror, consuming backup licensing and all of that, right? And we take all that cold data and we move it off to something cheaper, and we reduce all those extra copies. It's not that, by putting it on a durable storage. So that's how we're able to save them money, because we essentially say actively manage your hot data and you should passively manage your cold data. Don't treat all data the same. And it's not that people don't know that they shouldn't treat all data the same. It was just too difficult to do it before.
Yeah. Well, it's probably like you say that it didn't start out that way, but then, we keep throwing more storage and then it's not urgent anymore. So we make another copy and
Yeah, and I don't know, if you're like me, I create a lot of data, and I don't sit there and say, oh, I'm done with this, let me go delete it, right? I just keep creating more data. That's what I do, right? And I don't want to delete anything because I don't know when I might need it.
Yeah. Yeah, or just to find it is a lot of work. I did something like that where I checked in my own home, my own private NAS share, and I found I had a copy of my resume that I had 110 times because I'd copied it into different folders for different years, and then I'd back that up and copied that. And if you think about it, like the amount of data that I have at home is probably what an entire company had 20 years ago. And now I'm having those problems, right? So just multiply that and you have today's problems.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And the honest truth is you shouldn't have to worry about it as a user, right? I mean, that's why data management in the background can take care of a lot of these things for you.
Yeah, yeah. How about, one thing I am seeing generally, just, not necessarily related just to data management, but is now I don't know if it's the difficulty or the challenge or the complexity of just moving operations to a cloud. And, like you just mentioned earlier, there's data gravity. So things starts out on premise, that's got gravity, then it starts going to a cloud. Some of it goes a little bit, but then that starts to have gravity. Are you seeing people taking advantage of things like multi-cloud or really doing hybrid in a meaningful way? And if not, what's holding them back?
People are starting to definitely use hybrid cloud a lot, especially in the last year and a half. We've seen tremendous acceleration towards that. It's still difficult to really leverage it well because a lot of times when they think of going to the cloud, they think, oh, I'll create a new storage pool that will be backed up by the cloud. No, that's not very good, because now again you've created another silo on your site, right? If you create a gateway kind of solution, that's yet another silo. You really want to bridge the cloud and your current storage in a seamless way. And companies are starting to do that. Multi-cloud, we are starting to see that. I think so far companies have been using multi-cloud more as for different use cases. They might use different clouds, but they are starting to see multi-cloud as a data protection strategy. So we do have customers now that want to replicate data from one cloud to another. So instead of keeping a second copy in one cloud, put the second copy in a different cloud because it's more resilient. And it's also means they're not locked into one cloud, because that could be the next problem. Is instead of storage lock-in, you get into a cloud lock-in.
Yeah, and of course the economics support that, because taking your data out of a cloud is a whole other game. If I use the hotel analogy, it's they charge you to take your things home with you.
Yeah.
So, yeah, no, that's really a challenge. So if I am the, at least the CIO of a company, maybe somebody reporting to the CIO, where do you begin this journey? Assuming you're not already a little bit down this path, like where do you start? What should I look at or measure or think about?
Yeah, you cannot measure what you don't know. So I think it all starts with visibility. How do you get a good picture of what you have, what you're spending, and how your data is growing? And that's the thing. We start with visibility. We first give the analytics, because you can, without that insight, without knowing what you have, you're just taking shots in the dark all the time. And it's all guesswork.
Yeah. And what's a good way to start with that measurement? Is there a way probably a lot of companies have a fair amount of complexity. Is there a way to kind of look at what you have currently and make a judgment on where to begin, or the
Yeah,
easy?
absolutely. Yeah, we have a trial, and we actually engage with customers. We will show them actually what's in their storage and what it's costing them. So if a customer wants to engage, they can just reach out to komprise.com and sign up for a demo and a trial, and we'd be happy to show it to them. It's very simple. They don't need to make any changes to their infrastructure to start getting that analytics. We will help them with that.
Yeah, that's great. And I think when it comes to anything around your data, that any vendor can show up and tell you all kinds of things, but you'll never know how it works until you try it with your own data, because it's all so unique now.
Yeah.
As a result. So that's great. Well, one question that I like to ask everybody, to kind of to wrap things up, and this is probably more for our benefit because we are called Cloud Native X. And one of the things that I asked when I joined even was, what does exactly cloud native mean? And it used to mean born in the cloud, and then it became, it has to be Kubernetes, and I think now it's slowly becoming, I don't know, IT again. I'm curious, what do you think cloud native actually means?
I think cloud native means you're able to leverage truly the capabilities of the cloud, no matter what format your data is in. And it shouldn't matter whether your application was written before the cloud. So I think to have to rewrite everything for the cloud just to take advantage of the cloud is not tenable. The bulk of enterprise apps are not going to get completely rewritten overnight. So to me, cloud native is bridging anything you have to run better in the cloud and take advantage of the cloud.
That's great. So that's fantastic. I think that to me, that's one of the better definitions. If it's born in the cloud, you might as well actually use what's unique about it, right?
Right.
So is what does Komprise have planned in this coming year? Is there any exciting developments that we should look out for?
Absolutely. We are multi-cloud data management is becoming an increasingly bigger thing for customers. So that's where we are putting a lot of our focus. So you'll see a lot more capabilities from us in handling multiple sites, multiple clouds. We already have a lot of cloud data management capabilities, but we're going to continue to enhance all of those.
Okay, fantastic. Well, it's great. I'm looking forward to that. And thanks very much. This is a topic obviously close to my heart. So, so I enjoyed that very much, and look forward to seeing more from you and speaking with you again, and working closely with your team as well from our side. So thanks very
Sounds
much.
great. Thank you for having me.